So we're learning Likkutei Sichot, Volume 1. The Sichot for Parshas Metzora and Shabbos HaGadol, the great Shabbos, the Shabbos before Pesach. We're on page 227, chapter 1. So this Sichot is beautifully divided into three parts. You can't miss it. He says where each part was taken from, and they're mamash achnav dalam taka. And not only that, but they have an inner rhythm, an inner rhyme between them, different parts. The first part is going to be about submission, and submission here is going to be submitting our tendency to see the world as a random generator. That everything in the world is random. You have to submit that. You have to conquer that tendency that you have. We know that the Yetzias Mitzrayim was when they turned Mikre into Moshe. Both have the same gematria, 345. Mikre means a random event, without reason. And Moshe is the opposite. It's that I took him out of the waters, right? Took out what waters? The Mayim Rabim, the great waters of this world, where a person is constantly feeling that he's being drowned by reality. So Moshe Rabbeinu takes you above the waters. He takes you to a place where you can see, like Avram, from above the stars. You can see that there actually is a rule to what's going on. No, I'm saying Mina Mayim Shitu is like Hashem saying Mina Mayim Shitu. It's just happened to be put it in those words in the name into the mouth of Bitya, Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, let's see. Shabbat zu kekol Shabbatot hashna kshura parasha mesayemet b'Torah. In that year, Metzora was like our year, Shabbos HaGadol. And so, even though it's Shabbos HaGadol, it's the great Shabbos, the Shabbos before Pesach, it's also connected to a parsha. כבוד קדושת מורי וחמי אדמו"ר היה משתמט מלהזכיר את שם הפרשה הנוכחית. So you see, even in things of holiness, that this parsha is called Metzora by many people. The Frierdiker Rebbe says didn't call it by this name. This is also a submission. There's even submission in holiness. בספרים שונים אין הפרשה נקראת בשמה כי אם פרשת טהרה. They didn't want to call it Metzora, that the person is a leper. And since the topic is not the leper actually, but the topic is how the leper becomes sanctified again, how he removes the defilement from him. So it's called the parsha of, how do you say tahara? Purity. Of becoming pure, purification. אבל כבוד קדושת מורי וחמי אדמו"ר היה נמנע בכלל מלקרוא אותה באיזה שם שהוא. He says in general he didn't even call it by name. No name. Not Metzora, not Parashat Satara. It didn't have a name. ולרוב כתב הוא אמר את היום בחודש וכדומה. And usually he just said it's this day of the week or this day of the month and that's it.
So what about all the other parshas which have
Korah? Not so bad. Apparently. כן אתה הוא חודש ניסן זמן יציאת מצרים. So he's going to take that. He's not going to say that it's not Metzora, because it says here, up here, Parshas Metzora again. So the Rebbe wasn't like that in that sense. He said the name of the Parsha, but he says we're going to relate it to the month of Nisan. Zman Yetziat Mitzrayim, the time that they came out of Egypt. ככל העניינים, גם עובדה זו שפרשתנו נקראת בחודש ניסן היא בהשגחה פרטית שכן יש לשני עניינים אלו קשר הדדי. So there's a connection between the fact that they came out in Nisan and the fact that it's the month of Nisan. Okay, so that we saw more of that in the previous parsha. Now let's see what he's going to say now. Chapter 2. בקשר ליציאת מצרים אמרו רז"ל, the sages said regarding the exodus from Egypt, בזכות האמונה נגאלו אבותינו ממצרים. So this is brought in the Medrash and the Mechilta, in the Yalkut Shimoni, and Shir Shirim Rabbah, that in merit of their faith, they came out of Egypt. Tov. Says the Rebbe, בזכות האמונה נגאלו אבותינו ממצרים, דוק אמונה ולא הכרה. They came out in merit of their faith, and not in merit of their intellectual understanding. Hakara here is intellectual understanding. It says it in a moment more clearly. מה המיוחד שבאמונה? מדוע תלויה יציאת מצרים דווקא בזכותה? What is special about faith, and why was the exodus from Egypt dependent specifically on faith and not on some logical conclusion that they came to? For instance, they could have come to the logical conclusion after time that if Hashem is strong enough to do all these miracles and bring all these plagues, maybe we should worship him. And that could have been a logical conclusion for them. So he says like this, what is the difference between faith and everything else? He says, the righteous among the nations also admit, and they come to the conclusion that there is God, even a creator. But for them it is not a matter of faith. They don't believe in the creator, they've come to the logical conclusion that there is a creator. There's a big difference. By the way, it doesn't mean that the Jew can't come to the logical conclusion that there is a creator. You should be able to do that also. But faith is something else. Faith is something entirely different than coming to a logical conclusion about God.
Faith is no place to answer.
It starts where the logic ends. Kim totza'a shel הכרה שכלית. ההתבוננות במציאות העולם תוך הנחה שאין דבר עושה את עצמו. How do they come to this conclusion that there must be a God, there must be a creator? Not just a God, but a creator. Because they have a logical statement which says nothing makes itself. Everything has a cause. Everything that we see had a cause. So the world must have had a cause. What's the cause? The first cause is God. So even in a certain sense, even the philosophers come to such a conclusion that there must have been a first cause, and God is the first cause. And not only that, if you say that He is the first cause, you mean that He causes something, He does something. So He must be running it. It could be that He's running it from very, very far away in time and in space, or whatever it is, from a long, long time ago. But He set it in motion. In that sense, He's running it. At least that much they all admit to. But that comes from a logical conclusion. אך בהיות והאלוקות אינה נקלטת לגביהם לכשעצמה, כי אם רק מתוך נקודת המוצא של קיום העולם, מצטמצמת הכרתם והודעתם רק במידה שקיום העולם מחייב אותה. He says, but because their connection, their knowledge of the Creator is based on this logical inference, then nothing makes itself, and therefore the world has to have had a cause, and this cause must be running it, or it must have set everything in motion. So that is what the definition of God is for them. It's a definition that's locked into the logic and into the existence of the world. So therefore they don't know God Himself. God Himself is beyond the world. He doesn't need the world to be God. To be the creator, maybe. Because we say He creates other things as well. But if you limit Him to being just the creator, to being what created the heavens and the earth, what created the laws of nature, what created nature and how nature runs, you have a very partial picture of what God is. And so your picture is dependent entirely on your mind, on your logic. But what is beyond nature, what is beyond creation, that they cannot admit to, because it's not logical, it's a leap. For them it's a leap. You have to somehow come outside the world, they have to come outside, but there's nothing like that. All we know is what's in front of us. But the faith of the Jewish people to begin with doesn't start from looking at nature. It doesn't start from looking at the world. Because Avram's faith that everything is one, by definition, ignores nature. Because nature tells me, it yells at me, it screams at me, that there are many, many, many forces here. The world is a plurality. In fact, if I would have to define God according to nature, I would come to something like Spinoza, which is what we call the pantheistic picture of God, which means that God is the force of gravity, and God is this, and He's that, and there's not anything that makes it all one in the end. If you want to make it all one, you have to go against the grain of what you're looking at. Okay? So the Jewish faith in God does not start from the world. It starts from the contrary to the world, actually ignoring the world. בני ישראל קשורים מעצם טבעם באלוקות, ולכן נקלטת מהם האלוקות לכשעצמה. The Jewish people are connected to God Himself. This is their nature. Their nature is to be connected to God Himself. They have a relationship with God Himself beyond nature. ולכן נקלטת בהם אלוקות שלעצמם. Therefore, what they grasp, again, not in the logical sense, because in the logical sense you can only grasp what's in front of you, but they grasp with other faculties of the soul, for instance, faith. It's like the divine soul, but in principle, this is what we call faith. So with that, we grasp God Himself. Just as the focus of the nations of the world is the world, creation, so the focus of the Jewish people is God. And because of that, the faith of the Jewish people is not limited to what can be contained within nature. And therefore it includes within the principles of faith godliness that is beyond the world. For instance, the giving of the Torah. The Torah is not a logical conclusion. Okay? There was a set of laws called the Hammurabi laws. It was one of the first empires. It was one of the original Babylonian empires. Okay? It was Akkadian. Okay? But it was in Babel, it was in the same place. And they had a king whose name was, or an emperor whose name was Hammurabi. And he was either a little bit before Moshe Rabbeinu, before Moses, or a little bit after. It's hard to but it's around the same period. And he wrote a code of laws. And the code of laws were inscribed on tablets that were in his main city. I don't remember what his main city was called. I used to know all the Akkadian cities. Today my mind is sees the map but can't see the names. Ur, I think it was Ur probably. And so came the archaeologists and said, you see, Moshe Rabbeinu, he's a plagiarizer. What did he do? He learned about the Akkadian laws, the Code of Laws, and the Code of Laws is mostly about Ben Adam Lechavero, what they call torts, okay? The tort law. And he plagiarized, and he said, oh, God gave me this. He said, I can't prove that they're wrong. The point is that when you compare them, you see that there are a lot of differences. So, as a plagiarizer, he at least made it better. One of the main things that he made it better in is what they call the Abtalia, or Abtalion, I think. That in the Hammurabi laws, if you stole something, you had to give back exactly what you stole. If you took somebody's eye out, they took your eye out. If you chopped their hand off, they chopped your hand off, and so on. I think that's called Abtalion, or something like that. The reason I remember that name in Greek is because I used to have this theory that was why Shmaya was called Shmaya, and Avtalion was called Avtalion, because why would you name a Talmid Chacham? Well, his parents, obviously, they were brothers, Shmaya and Avtalion. So one of them they called Shmaya, which is a beautiful Jewish name, and the other one they called Avtalion, which is a Greek name. What's going on? What did they become Balei Tshuva in the middle? You get people like that now. Hard to believe. So I used to think that maybe the reason they called him Avtalion is because that was a sugya that they were very, very engrossed in at the time. And which means Talion means an eye for an eye. Abtalion is like abnegation. It's like the ab negates. It becomes, no, you don't do that. You pay money instead of the, okay, it's the theory. Anyway, I don't know if it's true or not. I've never seen anybody serious repeat it. So maybe it's just me. Write a doctorate about it, yeah. I think I once ran it by a person who teaches Jewish law, meaning Talmudic law at the Sorbonne. He's a professor there. He's a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He was the adopted son of the Sridei Yesh of Rabbi Chil Weinberg. So he said he'd get back to me, but I don't remember that he ever did. Anyway, that was 30 years ago. I haven't talked to him since about that. Okay, so why did we get into this? Because Moshe Rabbeinu, even if he plagiarized, he changed it. How did he change it? He changed it in so many ways that I have no concern about the fact that he maybe saw Hammurabi's laws, and I have no problem with him knowing it, and it doesn't matter. But whatever Hashem gave him, it made it 1,000,000 times better. So you can say Hashem inspired him, you can say whatever you want. But in the end, this came from outside the world, because the Hammurabi laws were as far as human logic could take them at that time. At that time, in the 18th century BC. But Moshe Rabbeinu brings it not just 10 levels higher. He brings it an infinite number of levels higher, because we're still using the same thing. We're still building on it, and nobody cares for Hammurabi's laws. They don't study it in any faculty, I promise you. So, if that's plagiarization, okay, so it's plagiarized. Okay? But that's what it means, that we believe in things that come beyond nature. They come outside of nature. Like, for instance, the Torah. ובהתאם למוסבר בתורת החסידות באמות ההבדל בין אמונת אומות העולם לבין אמונת ישראל, אמונת ישראל היא בשם הוויה. The difference is explained in Chassidus, to put this in Chassidic terms, is that the faith of the Jewish people is based on the name Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Tetragrammaton. What does Havaya mean? It means Haya Hoveh V'yeh. He was, he is, and he will be. Meaning, as one. He's one and the same. Before, now, and after. There is nothing in the world that we know that remains the same over time. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Kol hoveh nifsad. Everything that exists suffers from entropy. It changes quickly, it changes slowly, but it changes. And so you can't say about anything in the world that it was the same before, as it is now, as it will be in 1,000,000 years.
Not death.
Death is not something. Death is the end of entropy. The only thing you can say is that all the time. But Hashem, He's one and the same always. That's what Havaya means. That for Him, past, present, and future are not just as one in front of Him, but He remains the same throughout them. He's not affected by time. He's outside of time. So He's both outside of creation in the sense of the physical part of creation, and He's also outside of creation in the sense of the time. Right? Ve'emunat umot ha'olam, but the faith of the nations of the world, is b'shem Elokim. They believe in what we call Elokim. That's a pasuk that we say every evening before we go to sleep. Ve'karu le'elaka de'elakaya. Yirmiyahu says they call Him the God of gods. What do they mean by God? Elokim. As we know, the gematria is a teva, nature. Keder she'paro v'chartumav amru, just as Pharaoh and his sorcerers said, Lo yadati et Havaya. Havaya I've never heard of. I don't know what you're talking about. And so I won't send the people. Because we have a law here in Egypt, and it's once you're a slave forever. There's no changes. We decide. Okay. So our laws are this way. You can't escape our laws. You can't get out of our laws.
So how did they let Yosef become king?
Why not? Why not?
Because he was a slave.
He wasn't. He remained a slave to Pharaoh. He remained under Pharaoh. He wasn't freed. That's why the whole thing is with Pharaoh. That's why you go to Pharaoh. That's why Pharaoh has to send the people, and that's why Pharaoh chases after them afterwards. Because they're all mine. Everything is mine, including the viceroy. Everybody is. Nobody's anything but my slave. That's Pharaoh's picture of the world. But the same sorcerers say Etzba Elokimi. It's the finger of God, the finger of Elokim. So they recognize Elokim. They just can't recognize Havaya. Liyater Avara. To make this clearer, what are we talking about, says the Rebbe? We're talking about something very specific. Lo Yehudi mechapes b'chol davar shebaolam et hateva shebo. What does it mean that the nations of the world, their focus is on the world? It means that whatever they look at in the world, what they'll look for is what is the rule, what is the natural rule that guides and forces this to be the way it is. They're looking for the nature of things. רק כשהוא נתקל בתופעה שהיא בבחינת נס גלוי ואין לה כל מקום בטבע, הרי הוא נאלץ להודות שהיא אצבע אלוקים. It's only when he suddenly encounters something that doesn't fit any of the rules that he knows, and then he has to say, oh, there's the hand of God here, the finger of God. But again, Elokim. וגם אז, and still then, הוא משתדל להלביש את הדבר בלובשי הטבע. he still tries in some way to find why this is still within the rule. It's not outside of the rule. It's still a special case of the rule. לעומתו היהודי להבדיל מחפש מיד בכל דבר ובכל תופעה את האלוקות שבהם. But a Jew, on the other hand, is constantly looking for godliness in everything, meaning that this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. I don't care about the rules that govern the world. Not that I don't care, I know that there are rules. Yeah. But that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested, my focus is on godliness. So in whatever happens, what I'm interested in is, why is this not just the finger of God, this is the hand of God. This is entirely God's doing, it's not nature. We talked a little bit about this. We said that the non-Jews are allowed, b'shituf, to have respect, to honor the sun and the moon. Why? Because in the end, those are the ones that Hashem appointed to transfer His providence down into reality. But a Jew is not allowed to. Why? Because a Jew doesn't look at the sun and the moon as regulators of how the world works. They don't exist for all we care. Because it's God directly doing everything. That happened from the moment that God took Abraham above the stars. And He showed him reality from His point of view, from God's point of view. And there, the sun and the moon, they're nothing. They don't mean anything at all. They're transparent. They're completely translucent. They don't mean anything at all. And just as the non-Jew is constantly looking to find a rational explanation, a scientific explanation for those things that look like miracles. They don't easily put their hands up and say, oh, this was a miracle. Right? Take any rational, logical doctor and put him in front of a miracle. And they say, I don't understand why, but this guy was healed. I don't understand why, but it's natural. There was no miracle here. No finger of God came down and touched him and suddenly cured him. I just don't know all the rules yet. But once I figure out all the rules, I'll know how this worked also. On the contrary, in contradistinction, the Jew, when he sees even something that has a perfectly legitimate, good scientific reason, will automatically look at it and say, he looks at it with the abstinence of a hard-necked people, a stiff-necked people, and he says, En kanteva kim elokut. There's no nature here. There's only godliness. And those are these are like the strip it down. So this would be the essence of what it means to have faith as a Jew and what it means to have faith as a non-Jew. Again, it's not that non-Jews don't have faith. It's said that from time to time they agree that there's a finger of God here. But still they'd like to explain it away within nature. There's a very interesting thing that Einstein wasn't happy with quantum mechanics. Now, I'm twisting what he said, but the point remains the same. He said, I cannot believe that God is playing dice with the universe. He meant something entirely different. He meant it can't be that it's random, because randomness would mean that God is a pair of dice. And that I can't have. God for him had to be order. It had to be a rule. But when he said this, it's up for interpretation a little bit what he meant. And it could be that also hidden deeper inside there is that what I'm telling you is that it can't be that this is all randomness. Because what did quantum mechanics suddenly say? It said the rule of the universe is probability. It is randomness. It's not like what we used to think. We used to think that the laws of nature that we had found were completely solid, unchanging, and so and so. Quantum mechanics revealed that, you know what? They're not what you thought they are. They're probabilistic. They're still rules. They're still etched in stone. They're still, you can write out the equations. But these are probabilistic functions. They're not like the functions you used to think that you were writing out with F equals ma and that was all fine and dandy and that was it. It's not like that. It's a very complex wave function. It's very complex, which really means it's a probabilistic wave function. And Einstein said, I can't have that. I want to go back. I mean, he said, like, I want to go back to the rules, but that's not exactly it. It can also mean, look, it can't be this way. It's not all randomness. There must be a logic behind the randomness. But you can't go back to the old logic. That's not what he was looking for. He wasn't looking to go back to Newtonian mechanics. He was looking to find a higher order of understanding to the probabilistic randomness that we had discovered. And so he's saying there's got to be something above this. The moment you say there's got to be something above this, which is what he meant, there's no question that that's what he meant. He didn't mean to go back down. He didn't mean to go back down into Newton. Then it's up for grabs what he meant. And he could very well have meant exactly what we're saying. That there is no randomness because there's a creator who's constantly guiding things. And so what you see as randomness is because that's all we can see. We can only see the sun and the moon. We can only see nature. We can only see gravity. We can only see electromagnetism. That's all we see. But behind them is a higher order of structure which is coming from God. And God is free. He can change the structure and decision anytime. As it's been explained before, so one example of how a Jew looks at nature and doesn't see it, but rather sees godliness, is that we saw that in the Yerushalmi it says that why is the Seder of Zraim called Emunah? Why is the Seder of the order of Mishnah, the first order of Mishnah that deals with all the laws of agriculture? Why is it called Emunah, faith? Ve'emunat itecha, and so on in that verse that gives 6 words that correspond to the 6 orders of Mishnah. He says because any Jew who is a farmer, he believes, and that's why he sows. Ma'amin b'chei ha'olamim ve'zorea. Why? למרות שכל אחד יודע שזריעת גרעין באדמה מביאה באורח טבעי לידי צמיחה. Every person knows that if you put a seed into the ground and you cover it up and you water it, naturally it will grow, it will produce something. לא יסתמך על כך יהודי. The Jew doesn't depend on that. He knows this. It's not that he doesn't know this. כדי לקחת חפץ במקרה זה הגרעין לעבדו על ידי הנחתו במעמקי האדמה. It's not enough for him to lose a perfectly good seed. And you could take that seed and turn it into flour, yeah, and make it into food. So now you're going to put it into the ground. Why would you lose a perfectly good seed?
Because you're going to get many more.
That's what the nature says. חוקי הטבע מבטיחים לא שגרעין יצמח, אינם בסיס מספיק כדי להשמיד חפץ בידיים. These laws that say that something must come out of this seed are not enough. Natural laws are not enough for me to destroy a perfectly good seed. רק משום שהוא מאמין בחיי העולמים ובוטח בו שיצמיח את הזרע, הרי הוא זורע ומקווה לנשיאת פירות. It's only because he trusts in God, he believes in God, and he says, God will make it so. Because you know what? A lot of stuff can happen to the seed between the moment that I put it into the ground and 6 months later or 5 months later when I need to reap the wheat. A lot of stuff can happen. So I do this not because there are laws of nature that dictate that this is going to happen. I do this because I believe that Hashem will give me good produce this year. And that's why I'm doing it. So in the end, even the laws of nature, they don't stand, I can't trust them without Hashem ensuring that this is what happens. And we have to end here, and we'll continue tomorrow. God willing.